Haven busied herself with the very last of the packing up, feeling suddenly at a loss when Eddie rushed over to take the last of the bags from her to load up onto the cart they were using to transport things around the island. He gave her a significant look before his gaze flickered up to Miles and back again, and she remembered she was supposed to be introducing him. Well, maybe later. Once she'd figured out exactly who Miles Jackson was, because despite his obviously fake excuse about not dating within the industry, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to their date disaster than he'd let on, and she wanted to know what it was. Haven wasn't particularly proud of her behavior on their blind date, but at the time, she'd been pretty certain he deserved it. Actually, she kind of still was. But now he'd met the real her, and unlike last time, he'd actually sought her out again. Which meant there had to be some depths hidden under those film star good looks somewhere. "Shouldn't you be at the wedding breakfast?" Haven asked as a glowering Eddie took the last of the stuff away. Yasmin and Wayne were already waiting with the cart, casting curious looks back at her. "Probably." Miles shrugged. "Why don't you come with me?" "Because I'm staff," Haven said bluntly. "I eat up at the main villa with the rest of the employees later." "You're Haven Hapsgood," Miles countered. "I'm fairly sure they'd find a seat for you at the top table if you wanted it." "Well, I don't want it," Haven snapped back. She regretted it almost instantly. She could tell from the way Miles's eyes widened that he'd read more into that statement than she'd intended. "I mean, I want to eat with my staff. It's good for team cohesion. Or something." That was a reasonable, less angry point, right? But Miles didn't seem to be listening. "You're really not the woman you pretended to be on our date, are you? I thought we'd already established that." But the way he'd bought the act, the over-the-top spoilt brat silver spoon act, had only confirmed what she'd already known. That was what people thought of her. What they expected from her. All they expected from her. They expected her to be Isadora Mark II, even after everything that had happened, because they couldn't imagine another life for her. "Okay, well, if you won't join me for dinner, how about I join you?" Miles suggested. "Join? What are you talking about?" He couldn't honestly be intending to miss the wedding breakfast, could he? "I had a late lunch," Miles said. "I can wait to eat, and you said you wouldn't be eating until later, so I'll just do that too." She tried to imagine Miles sitting at the dinner table with Eddie, Wayne, and Yasmin. God, they'd love her for that, I suppose. Great Miles beamed at her. "In that case, we've got time for a walk before dinner, right? We can talk. Actually get to know each other this time." Of course. Haven should have known there would be a catch. Miles was starving, but he was damned if he was going to let on to Haven about that fact. Especially when he'd just cornered her into taking a walk with him. A walk around the most romantic island he'd ever visited. If he was lucky enough to have a second chance at their date, he was determined to do it right. A walk. Right. Haven gave a resigned sigh, then shimmied out of her mermaid tail, leaving her in short denim cutoffs. Miles stared at the long, lean legs below them. He'd never have guessed she had legs like that under that tail. Miles tried to remember what she'd worn for their disaster date, but all his recollections of the night seemed to focus on the irritating way she'd twirled her hair, the bored, privileged drone of her voice, and the way she'd stared out of the window whenever he'd been talking. Folding the tail carefully, she tucked it into the canvas backpack she had slung over her shoulder. Then added the shell bra she removed, leaving her in a respectable bikini top that covered everything it should and still somehow seemed even sexier than it had any right to. Pulling a white tank top from the bag, she threw it on over the bikini top, tugging the ends of her hair out from the neckline. And Miles remembered how to breathe again. "What did you wear on our date?" he asked before he could think it through. Haven frowned at him. "A black dress, I think." "Probably anyway. That's what I usually wear when I can't get out of nights like that." Miles ignored the dig about their date and tried to remember the dress. He couldn't. Was it short? Does it matter? When he didn't respond, Haven rolled her eyes. It was nondescript, probably. The sort of outfit that fades into the background. He still couldn't remember it. But he was damn sure that Haven looked 1,000 times sexier in casual shorts and a t-shirt and white fabric sneakers that had been painted with mermaid scales. "Come on, let's go," she said, and Miles offered his arm, automatically feeling a little overdressed in his pale linen suit and open-necked white shirt. They chose the path that led away from the wedding celebrations. La Isla Marina was only a mile or so across as far as he could remember, so he figured it didn't much matter which way they went. They'd never be too far away from the rest of the party. The silence between them was comfortable, as relaxed as Haven's outfit. The path wound down towards the beach, a clear route through all the sharp rocks and knife-edged grasses that bordered the beach. Looking at them, Miles remembered how close Haven and that little boy had been to tumbling down over them and suppressed a shudder. Haven was obviously remembering the same moment. "Why did you jump in to rescue Bentley and me earlier?" He looked at her with surprise. "Because you were going to fall." "Yes, but I could have protected him, broken his fall." Haven said it so matter-of-factly he knew that was exactly what she'd intended to do before he leapt in. Maybe that was what persuaded him to tell her the truth. Haven wasn't entirely sure what sort of answer she'd expected from Miles, but she hadn't expected him to give it quite as much thought as he did. "I guess. I saw you and him about to tumble over that cliff." "I'd hardly call it a cliff," Haven interjected. "More of a slope." Miles gave her a small smile. "I promise you to that little boy, it was a cliff. It was the end of the world, and he was terrified." He stepped off the end of the path onto the beach itself, then turned back to Haven, where she stood a little higher on one of the many rocks she hadn't fallen onto. Then, without warning, he put his hands on her waist and lifted her effortlessly down to the sand. Haven very carefully ignored the heat that his hands against her skin, even through her thin tank top, generated. He might not be the self-absorbed, vain actor who judged everyone on appearances she'd assumed he was the night of their blind date, but he was still Miles Jackson film star. That way lay unwanted celebrity and possibly madness. She needed to remember that, but she couldn't stop herself questioning his answer. You sound like you're talking from experience there." Miles let go of her waist as if she were a knife edge. "I had a stepfather, one of the not great sorts." Haven blinked as she tried to figure out the connection. The only thing she could think of was, "What he held you over a cliff." "Probably just a slope," Miles admitted. "But I was only 8, and it felt like—" He broke off suddenly, and Haven realized belatedly how painful a memory this must be for him, and how intimate. "Like the end of the world," she murmured, and he nodded. Well, none of that had shown up in any of his gossip magazine interviews. Not that she read them. Often. Haven took a deep breath as she processed the realization that nothing about Miles was as she'd assumed. Just like nothing about her was how everyone else assumed. Really, after a life of being judged based purely on her family and her failure to follow them into show business, she should know better than to judge others. Turning abruptly, her sneakers digging into the sand, she faced Miles and held out her hand. Miles raised an eyebrow. "I think we've already met, you know." "No, I don't think we have," Haven said. "But I'm starting to think we should, from scratch." "Forget the date and the daring rescue," Miles asked, "and start fresh." "Exactly. No assumptions, no prejudices, nothing at all. We accept we don't know each other, and we try to learn, if you like." Haven concentrated on not letting her hand shake as Miles stared at it. She hadn't really considered what she'd do if he said no, but he didn't. His warm hand filled hers, and he shook firmly. "Okay." Haven beamed up at him. "Hi, I'm Haven." Miles couldn't help but smile as he shook Haven's hand for all the world like they hadn't ever met before. "Miles Jackson," he said as seriously as he could manage. "Pleased to meet you."
Likewise.
Haven's grin made the act worthwhile, he thought, as she turned and continued along the beach in a half-skip, half-walk fashion. Taking long strides to keep up, Miles shoved his hands into his pockets and thought about all the things he'd believed he knew about this woman. If he put them all aside, what would he want to know?
So, Haven, tell me about yourself,
He said.
What do you do, for example?
A question he'd totally failed to ask on their date, simply because he'd assumed he knew the answer. Haven Hapsgood, as far as anyone knew, lived off her family's money and fame, and never had to worry about work or survival. I own and run a company called Under the Sea Entertainment that organizes children's entertainment for parties and events. She answered promptly, and for a moment, Miles wished he'd asked that question first, instead of texting Gray on their date. Except then, he might not have had the opportunity to ask it here on La Isla Marina, with the sun going down over the sea and Spanish guitars ringing out from the wedding celebration further along the island shore. And on balance, he wouldn't want to give up this moment, seeing Haven in her shorts and t-shirt, skipping along in the fading sunlight, shells still strung through her hair, and her mermaid sneakers kicking up sand. That sounds fascinating, Miles said honestly, even if he was still playing along with her game. What made you decide to set up the company? Haven gave a small shrug. I like entertaining people, and children are an appreciative audience. I like entertaining people. Miles frowned as the words echoed through his mind. She came from an acting dynasty, could have got a call up for any role or audition she wanted in Hollywood. She admitted that she liked to entertain. You didn't think there were any other, say, more obvious jobs in the entertainment industry you could have pursued? He asked. I only ask because I'm an actor myself, you see. She flashed him a quick smile at his attempt to keep up the illusion that this was their first meeting, but somehow it never reached her eyes. Really? How lovely. My parents and brother act, actually, but I knew that wasn't for me. Why? What he really meant was how he realized. How could she give up all that opportunity, that easy route to fame? Not to mention that probable genetic talent. I never want to be famous, Haven said simply. And given my family connections, fame was inevitable, even if I sucked. You wouldn't, Miles said absently, thinking of her performance on their date disaster. When was the last time he'd met someone who didn't want to be famous? Never, he realized. Haven was something altogether new for him. What do you have against fame? Miles asked, and Haven heaved a silent internal sigh. Of course he wouldn't get it. His whole life and career were geared around becoming as famous as possible. I've seen the other side of it, I guess, she said, after a moment. Surely, he must have heard the Isadora story, at least. Everything has its downsides, right? And I just don't happen to feel that the downside to fame is worth the advantages. Your sister, of course. I'm sorry. Miles's face fell as he obviously remembered her family history. Yeah, well, the downside to fame. What prosaic words for the misery she'd seen it inflict. Isadora, her beloved older sister, so desperate for those scraps of fame that she'd go anywhere, do anything, just to be seen with the right crowd. She didn't want to act like Taylor. She just wanted to be known. And she was in every glossy magazine on the arm of the latest hot actor or in someone's Instagram feed in someone else's New York loft, wearing the latest designer clothes. She'd chased fame for its own sake. Until one of the right crowd was in the wrong place behind the wheel of a car after too much to drink with Isadora in the passenger seat, and she was gone in a flash of light and a screech of brakes. But the thing is, you're a Hapsgood, Miles said apologetically. You are famous whether you like it or not, No, Haven said firmly. I'm not. Taylor wanted that life and he got it same as my parents. Same as, well, anyway, I've been very careful to never seek it out, never chase it, never give in when someone tries to give it to me as a gift. No guest appearances, no reality TV shows, no tickets for premieres, no dating celebrities, apart from one very unfortunate blind date I'm trying to forget about. Miles grinned at that one, and she couldn't help but return it before she realized exactly what she'd said.
Hang on.
Miles said, his grin fading. So this unfortunate blind date. Are you saying that if you'd known who the date was, with you wouldn't have gone simply because he had some small measure of celebrity? Haven snorted at small measure as a description of Miles's excessive fame.
Basically, I guess I am.
So how does that make you any better than a date who, for example, assumed you were the typical daughter of a famous family with no interest in doing anything except living off the celebrity of others and spending their money, and texted their sister for a rescue before you had a chance to prove them wrong? Miles asked pointedly. You realize that would make no sense at all if we actually hadn't met before, Haven said, dropping the act for a moment.
But we have.
Miles grabbed her hand, so she had to look at him. So how is it different? It's not, Haven admitted with a sigh. Then she frowned. Wait, that's why you didn't want to go on a date with me? Because you thought I just used my family's name to coast through life and never did anything myself, like Isadora had? Sort of, Miles said, wincing. Huh. Haven stared at him, his warm brown eyes, his dark hair, his open smile. Looks like we really did get each other wrong. And suddenly, she really wanted to get it right. Haven's eyes were a familiar blue. Miles realized the same blue as the ocean beyond her, and the same blue as her mother's from a dozen of his favorite films. But somehow in Haven's eyes, it felt like he was seeing that color for the first time. Had her sister's eyes been the same color?
Why did you think I wanted out of our date?
He asked, unable to tear his gaze away. Haven's smile was a little rueful. In my experience, celebrities meeting me for the first time go one of two ways. Either they have no idea who I am, which I like, but realize I'm nowhere near as beautiful or funny or interesting as everyone else in the room, and have absolutely no interest in how famous they think they are, so they move on quickly. Otherwise, they know exactly who I am and spend the rest of the night trying to find a way to use that to their advantage. So you figured I was in the first group Miles fought to keep his voice steady, even as he felt a small ball of anger growing in his chest. How could so many people miss the life and vitality and beauty of Haven Hapsgood? Then he remembered that he'd missed it too until he'd seen her dressed as a mermaid and laughing in the Spanish sunshine with a whole gang of kids. Haven waggled her head from side to side in agreement. It made sense at the time. I suppose it did. They'd made their way so far along the beach they were almost level again with where the wedding celebrations were taking place up away from the sand. Spanish guitar music flowed down on the breeze, wrapping around them like a dance. Miles could hear laughter and conversation underpinned by the clink of glasses. You should go up and join the wedding, Haven said, glancing back over her shoulder. She was right, Miles knew. Gray would be fuming at so many missed opportunities to network to meet people who mattered. Miles didn't know how he'd explain to her that right now, Haven was all that mattered. He couldn't even explain it to himself.
You should come up with me,
he countered, knowing as he said it that she wouldn't. Laughing, Haven looked down at her cut-off denim shorts and mermaid sneakers. I'm hardly dressed for the occasion. You look beautiful, Miles replied honestly. More beautiful than any of those peacocks up there. Haven raised her eyebrows disbelievingly. Right. Tell me you never explained. Why don't you date women from the industry?
I think. Maybe for the same reasons you avoid fame.
Not just the risks, but the falseness of it. I guess I know how much else there is out there outside the Hollywood bubble, and that makes it difficult to just live inside it. Maybe later he'd tell her about the night he found Gray bleeding and crying, or the beating he took from his stepfather for accusing him of hurting her the night before they ran.
But not tonight.
Tonight, he wanted the magic. And when the Spanish music faded away, and the familiar strains of one of Jude Alexander's band's biggest hits started up on an acoustic guitar, he knew exactly what he wanted to do next.
Dance with me, Miles said, reaching out to take her hand again.
Haven hesitated. All the casual touches, the shared secrets, the romantic walk on the beach at sunset. This shouldn't be a surprise. As much as their first date might have been a disaster of epic proportions, even she wasn't so out of practice at this to not realize where things were heading. This was the date they could have had that night, if they hadn't been so busy prejudging each other, of course. But dancing, where everyone could see her, comment on her, judge her.
We can barely hear the music from here,
she said, stalling for time. And we're not done talking, getting to know each other.
Then we'll move closer, up to the actual wedding.
Miles pulled her closer.
And we can talk and dance. Call it multitasking.
Or not. The last thing she wanted was to be seen or worse photographed at this thing. But she did love this song.
Jude Alexander's voice soared through the air, faint, but still recognizable anywhere even without the backing of the rest of his band. She bit her lip to keep from singing along, but she knew her hips were moving in time to the music. She couldn't stop them.
If you think fame is so vacuous, why did you work so hard to get famous? She asked, trying to distract him from the dancing idea.
I guess because
I needed to be good at something. I needed to prove myself.
And no one could claim I hadn't made something of myself if I was up on the big screen.
That makes sense, I suppose, Haven allowed.
Plus, I wanted to do something that mattered, Miles added as if it were a secret. And appearing in action movies matters. Haven tried not to sound like she was laughing at him just a little bit. But Miles just rolled his eyes. Maybe not in a world importance way, no. But it means I'm known. It gives me influence, and it gives me money. Those are things I never dreamt of having before. And you can't deny that they're useful. I suppose. Haven hadn't ever really thought about it that way before. Money, influence, celebrity. They'd always just been there in her family, and they'd caused more harm than good most of the time. Now back to the dancing. We don't need to go up to the actual party, Miles said, his hands resting against her hips as she swayed. We can find our own spot out of the way where we can dance alone. I don't want to be seen, Haven said, knowing she was caving. I'm staff today, remember? It wouldn't be right. Not to mention that the visual of Haven Hapsgood showing up to Valentina's wedding in denim shorts and running off with the best-looking guy there would just be too much for the gossip magazines to resist. She'd be up on the internet sites in no time, and wasn't that what she'd spent years trying to avoid now? I promise. Miles grabbed her hand and tugged her towards a hidden path back up to the main island away from the beach. It'll be just you and me and the moonlight. Okay then, Haven said, and hoped she wouldn't regret it. Sneaking around at the biggest wedding of the year was harder than Miles imagined it would be. It helped that most of the guests had been drinking since early that afternoon, of course. But even so, the party seemed to have spread out to take over most of the island. And he and Haven spent most of the song ducking behind foliage and avoiding the eyes of people they both knew by reputation, if not in person. Miles particularly avoided Gray, who he suspected might be mad with him. She definitely had plans for this wedding, plans that Haven probably wouldn't have approved of. Finally, they stumbled into a small glade just beyond the path that wound from the central villa to the area that had been set aside for the wedding. It was far enough set back that Miles was moderately sure that no one would see them, but close enough that the music of Jude Alexander rang out clear and bright. Best of all, the moonlight shone through the greenery and lit up Haven's hair and eyes until Miles couldn't see anything else anyway. Or maybe he just didn't want to. He wasn't sure anymore, Perfect Haven said with a small smile. Miles wrapped his arms around her small waist and held her against him, swaying with her in time to the song. Remind me, why didn't we do this the first time we met? They could have gone dancing at that club he loved, the one Gray took him to that time. He could have shown her off to the world. Except she'd have hated that, of course. Because we both jumped to conclusions, Haven said, resting her head against his shoulder. We shouldn't do that anymore. Even if he couldn't show her off, he could just enjoy her company. That would be more than enough, he felt. Definitely. They danced in silence, the music swelling and dropping low around them like the ocean waves. And for the first time in a very long time, Miles started to think that there might be something here. Something that could even look like a future if he squinted. Haven wasn't what he'd expected. She wasn't like anyone else he'd met since he left that god-awful trailer park and ran away with Gray to seek his fortune. She felt like what he might have been seeking all those years ago. With a small shake of the head, Miles smiled to himself. It was far too soon to be thinking like that. He knew better. They both did. They both knew how life could go wrong when you least expected it. And yet, the very fact that he could feel the possibility, that was new and exciting. It was enough for now. He held Haven a little closer and allowed himself to enjoy the moment. Until he looked up and saw Gray watching him from the path, her hands on her hips, and a man with a camera behind her. The camera flash burst through what might have been the most perfect moment Haven had ever experienced. Just for that second, she hadn't been thinking about Isadora or her family, or who might be watching, or what they might say. She'd only been thinking about how right it felt to be in Miles's arms. But the flare of light from the camera took all that away. Reeling back, Haven pushed away from Miles, wrenching his arms from her middle. She knew she shouldn't look, that she should duck her head and cover her face with her hair so that they couldn't identify her from the photos. She knew objectively what she should do. But instead, she stared open-mouthed at the cameraman even as Miles pushed her behind him. She didn't recognize him, of course, but she recognized the elegant brunette standing beside him, Gray Jackson Miles's sister. "There you are," Gray said loudly as she covered the ground from the edge of their secret glade to Miles in 2 long strides. "People have been asking after you. People you really should be talking to, Miles. I can't do all your networking for you, you know." "I know, Gray. Just..." He glanced back at Haven and the camera flashed again. I have to go." Haven stammered out the words and turned, pushing her way through foliage and plants to get to where the path curved on the far side of their glade, leading back towards the central villa and her staff. Her friends, back to what mattered to her. Wait. Half an hour later, Eddie stole a gulp of wine from the glass Yasmin had brought for Haven and stared at her across the table. "So, you not only had a date with Miles Jackson that you never told us about, you also had a secret dancing rendezvous with him tonight, then ran out on him." Haven winced. Basically, when he put it like that, it didn't sound great. "In heaven's name, why?" Eddie asked. "I thought you were supposed to be introducing us." "Sorry," Haven said. This is about your sister, right?" Wayne said, taking the seat next to her. Wayne wasn't usually the emotional sort, but Yasmin had always claimed he had hidden depths. Haven was starting to see her point. "You saw what fame did to her?" Haven replied. "The whole world saw. She chased it, and it killed her in the end. I can't let that happen to me. Doesn't seem to me like Miles Jackson wants that sort of all-or-nothing fame either, Wayne pointed out. If it was, he wouldn't use his celebrity status the way he does. Haven looked up sharply. What do you mean? He's the ambassador for that kid's charity, right? Donated all the profits from his last film too, I heard. Yasmin rolled her eyes. Everyone knows this, Haven. I didn't, but it made perfect sense. Hadn't he said he'd wanted to be able to do something with his money and influence? She'd known Miles wasn't the man she'd imagined him to be on their first date, but she'd honestly believed she'd understood him this time round. But it seemed there was still more to learn, even if that meant stepping into his world for a while and letting others see her there. Well, how was I to know you were romancing the lesser-known Hapsgood Grey? Asked Tetchley as she poured Miles a glass of wine. They'd been having this argument for well over half an hour now, but it didn't show any sign of stopping. Grey wouldn't admit she'd been wrong to hunt him down and interrupt his moment with Haven, even though she'd known she had a paparazzi tail. Grey never did like to admit fault for anything. Don't call her that. Miles downed the wine knowing it was a bad idea on an empty stomach, even as he did it. He didn't care. He'd gotten his second chance with Haven, and he'd blown it. He wasn't fool enough to think he'd get a third. Nobody got that lucky, right? Haven Hapsgood Grey said, and Miles turned to tell her that yes, that was better, only to realize she wasn't talking to him. Hi, you must be Miles's sister, Haven said in response, and Miles felt his chest tighten. She was still dressed in her shorts and t-shirt, her sneakers still mermaid-themed, and her blonde hair tousled by the salt air. And he still thought she was the most beautiful thing on the island. His mermaid. I'll let you two, Grey said, drifting off to talk to someone else without finishing her sentence. Finally, some tact from his blunt-as-a-spoon sister. And maybe not even too late. I'm sorry I ran, Haven said. I'm sorry I outed you, Miles replied. I know you didn't want people to know you were here. As she'd predicted, plenty of guests had noticed her presence and were openly staring. Yeah, she said, looking a little uncomfortable. But it's been drawn to my attention today that maybe fading into the background isn't the only option I have. That celebrity can have its uses. And maybe wearing my ignore-me black dress on dates and expecting the worst isn't always the best plan in the world. Miles smiled at that. Oh, so what do you think might be the best plan for you? He asked, all the while thinking, me. I'm what's best for you. Maybe using the fame I was born with to get something done. Something that matters to me. Like helping kids who need it. She met his gaze at that, and he heard all the things she wasn't saying. Funny you should mention that, actually, he said. We should definitely talk about that some more. I may even have a proposal for you along those lines. One he'd never even imagined her going along with. But suddenly, all things seemed possible. I agree. Haven grinned. In fact, I was going to suggest, how do you feel about third chances? Miles felt his whole heart lift and lighten in his chest, as if filled with hope and air instead of blood and muscle. Like a third date, you and me. A third chance to get it right? Haven confirmed. I mean, I know it's two more than most people get, but I've always thought that the third time was the charm, Miles said. And then he kissed her, knowing that even if the third date was a disaster, he'd keep trying until they got it right, because Haven Hapsgood was worth as many chances as it took.